All right, everyone. Nigel Farage has come to Boris Johnson, he's the leader of the Tories in the UK, to try to strike a deal. And the idea is that in the upcoming election, the early election in the UK, that's going to frame the debate going forward over Brexit. If you don't have enough pro-Brexit conservatives plus the Brexit Party members together to form a majority, then there is going to be a fucking problem. Because Brexit fundamentally at that point won't happen. By the way, if the people of the UK are not even willing, nobody's asking you to go to war for your sovereignty or to restore democracy by fire and sword. You're being asked to go to a polling place and put a check mark on a piece of paper. If the people who support Brexit are not even willing to do that, not even willing to make sure that the composition of their parliament allows them to transit out of the EU in part or in parcel, then you might as well give up and just be a vassal of the EU, because it's obvious you're not capable of governing your own affairs. Maybe you should let the European government do it. Maybe you should join a post-nationalist confederacy, because maybe the UK just doesn't have enough wherewithal anymore, and enough balls anymore to govern its own affairs. That's what I would say. And I think that would be rather sad, because I hope that that's not actually the case. Nigel Farage should be running the show there. Why isn't he your prime minister already? You should just petition your queen to declare him unilaterally to be in charge of things so that he can clean house. He appears to be the only intelligent man involved in the UK's political system. But here's the plan. The plan goes like this, because there's so many political parties within the UK. What you do is, in areas where the Conservative is more likely to win, the Brexit Party stands down and doesn't field anybody. In areas where it looks like the Brexit Party can pick up a seat from Labour or the Liberal Democrats or whatever, the Conservatives stand down. They pledge support to one another, cooperate at that level, and then let the cards fall as they may. This probably, if successful, would lead to an actual Brexit, because you would probably win. Nigel Farage and his upswelling political movement has enough support probably to gain some degree of political latitude. The Conservatives are favored to crush Labour overall in a head-to-head match. You need to work together, though, otherwise you run a very, very high risk of losing. If Boris Johnson, at the end of the day on your election, doesn't have the votes, you won't have a Brexit. I'm sorry to tell all of you Brexiteers, but this is your last stand. What will happen otherwise is that at the most, the best case scenario you get going forward if there's no majority, is that Boris Johnson waters down the Brexit deal even further, capitulating to the EU and to the far left within the UK, the globalists there like Corbyn, probably ends up resigning, and somebody else takes over to limp to the finish line, giving you a form of Brexit that has never been envisioned by anyone that campaigned for it. This is probably, in most part, the birth child of Theresa May, because Theresa May was put in charge of Brexit negotiations without ever having been in favor of Brexit. You took a Remainer and put them in charge of making sure that you could leave properly. Obviously, that individual wanted it to be as close to remaining in the EU as possible. Again, that is your best case scenario if you get a Brexit at all, which is no longer clear at that point, if Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage can't work together. There's a very remote chance that the Conservatives alone can pull it off with the Brexit Party operating on its own and picking away at some of these seats. Very narrow chance. There's no reason for Boris Johnson to hold out. I think that Boris Johnson is developing a little bit of an ego at this point, doesn't want to be outshined by Nigel Farage. Now, there's the possibility, and I really hope this is the case, maybe they're already coordinating behind closed doors, and Johnson has come out publicly to disavow it just to keep the Labour movement or the Liberal Democrats from gaining support in fervency, because it would look like collusion and there'd be conspiratorial bullshit going on about Russia or whatever. Maybe that's the case. If that's the case, more power to him. Yes, keep it under wraps. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, if there's no further attempt by Boris Johnson to work with Nigel Farage, if he doesn't choose to recognize that, what I think is going to happen is that Brexit will not occur. It will continue to be extended. Fury over this will continue to grow. And a very vocal minority will continue to pour into the Brexit Party. Labour will continue to be crushed. The Conservatives will be punished. And what you'll have is exactly what I proclaimed would happen 5 years ago, which is the death of the center in the face of the unwillingness for a paradigm to be allowed to shift. When the centrist parties, the Conservatives and Labour movements there, roughly equating to the Well, in U.S. politics, they'd be basically like, you know, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, but to you, they're supposedly center-left and center-right. Whatever. If they are unwilling to acknowledge that the paradigm in the UK has shifted, the people will punish the center, flock into supposedly fringe movements. The Liberal Democrats will probably keep growing. The Brexit Party or whatever, you know, comes after will keep growing. They will eventually take power. There will be riots. There will be struggle. There will be various problems there, social and fiscal. At the end of the day, it will result in some form of restoration of order, probably a capitulation to an actual Brexit. But after years and years of struggle, after years and years of nonsensical bureaucratic hand-wringing, for no reason other than the ego of people within your labor movement and possibly now Boris Johnson. That's why it will happen. And the influence of foreign powers, multinationalists, globalists. The influence of people like Soros, who are willing to pour billions of dollars into your country to try to convince you that somehow the UK is incapable of governing itself like a normal nation. It doesn't make any sense. How can anyone possibly be hoodwinked by this bullshit? How can anyone possibly believe it? If you have a functioning brain to the point where you're legally entitled to cast a ballot because you haven't been ruled a ward of the state, how can you possibly believe that argument? The UK, of all nations, incapable of governing something? My goodness, how far the mighty have fallen. That's about all. Peace out.